Hi, welcome to Season 1, Episode 6 of Impact Effectively. And I've entitled this episode, What Am I Saying? Because my focus is once again on the language that we use. If you've not been watching or listening to earlier podcasts, I'm Florence Madden. I'm a management development trainer, an NLP trainer and coach based in Cumbria in the north of England. I'm the co-author of a book called Everyday NLP and the author of a book called The Intention Impact Conundrum, on which this season of podcasts is based. And as the title implies, the whole season of podcasts is around understanding the impact that we have on ourselves and other people. And if it's not what we want, then how we can make changes in that. Back in episode 4, which I entitled, Are You Buying Into You? I was specifically looking at the language that we use about ourselves. And perhaps that inner critic that we need to silence and turn into an internal coach. I'm continuing with the theme of language this week, and my focus is moving into what I'm thinking about is more of our hidden habits in language. We've all been speaking probably since we were about 3, and therefore it can be quite tricky to notice when we are using language that is not serving us, that is not giving the message to ourselves and others that we might want. Let me give you an example of this. I was talking to someone this week about something that I'm planning to do, and the words that person used was difficult, that what I was going to do was going to be difficult, that it was going to be daunting, and that it was going to be hard. Now, I don't believe their intention at all was to put me off in any way. And yet I was concerned with the use of those words. Because on the one hand, was that implying that this person didn't think I was capable of doing the thing that I was planning to do? And I was also wondering about the effect on my unconscious mind of someone describing what I was about to do in that way. And I think the key thing in this is that their intentions, I am very satisfied, were very, very well intended. But they just were unaware of the language. And that's a trap for all of us. When we speak, our language has a surface structure. And what we actually say is coming from thoughts and feelings that we hold maybe unconsciously at a deeper level. And the problem that gives us is that when we say something that is off-putting or negative to ourselves or someone else, or maybe specifically to ourselves, by actually giving those thoughts and feelings words, by actually expressing them, they are reinforced. So if I say to myself, what I'm about to do is difficult, because that's the feeling that I have, that language is heard by my unconscious mind and reinforces the thought that what I'm about to do is difficult. So there's a real opportunity there to notice our language and to start to make changes. George Orwell said, "But if thought corrupts language, then language can also corrupt thought." So he was referring to this two-way mechanism. And we can, once we're aware of it, can start to interrupt that mechanism. And as I said, these are things that we are not necessarily always aware of. They are habits of speech. I recently watched a TED Talk by Leah Boritsky, which was entitled How Language Shapes the Way We Think. Now, in her TED Talk, she is talking about how the way in which language is constructed, or various languages are constructed, impacts on our thinking. And she quotes a really interesting example, because if we can imagine that somebody, bumps against a vase and it falls, the way in which we express that in English is to say, he broke the vase. Other languages don't actually have that kind of construction. And she quoted other languages who would say, the vase broke. So there's quite an important difference there in how that event is described. And you'll notice the blame that attaches to that first one. So the way in which we speak has an impact on how we think, as well as the other way around. And we have in our habits what I would refer to as weasel words, some of which I've mentioned: daunting, difficult, hard. And there are many more. For example, people talk about, well, I'll try to do something, which doesn't really kind of fill us with a great deal of belief that they're actually going to do it. And of course, we use these words to ourselves as well. So what's to be done? In my other series of podcasts, which is entitled Everyday NLP Bites, the whole of season 5 is taken up with looking at something which in NLP is referred to as meta model. And what these are really a collection of the types of language patterns that we use and that we hear on an everyday basis that very often is distorting how we think and may well be holding us back in some way in what we do or in our effective relationships with other people. I'm not going to go into those here in detail, but simply to say that it is worthwhile being mindful as we speak to ourselves and others, being mindful of the assumptions that we make, the times when we think that we know what someone else is thinking, when we think we know what someone else's motivation is. So just noticing the assumptions that we make, the mind reading that we do, the way in which we sometimes narrow down our options by saying it's got to be this or it's got to be that. The more that we become aware of our language, then the more we can do something about it. Someone who was a great wordsmith and understood very, very well the impact that language had on himself as well as other people was Muhammad Ali. Now, whether you're a boxing fan or not, I think probably most people have heard his affirmation, "I am the greatest." That was a very powerful message that was going to his unconscious mind. He was also capable of using his language effectively with his opponents as well. Back in the day, there was quite a famous fight that was held in Zaire, which was titled The Rumble in the Jungle with George Foreman. And as I understand it, not knowing a great deal about boxing, Ali was very fit and Foreman perhaps not so, and he was certainly struggling in the heat of Zaire. And allegedly, when they were doing that huggy thing that boxers do to presumably tire the other opponent out and give yourself a rest, not being a boxing expert, I think that's what's happening. But allegedly what Ali whispered in George's ear was, a hell of a bad time to get tired, George. So you can just imagine if you're already feeling tired and feeling a bit beleaguered, then hearing that in your ear is going to have an impact. So think about the language that we want to put in our own ear. When you're about to maybe go for an interview, have an important conversation with somebody, do a presentation, what is it that you would like to hear? And think about what you say to yourself. I'm going to finish today on a quote from Rita Mae Brown, who said, "Language exerts a hidden power, like the moon on the tides." So thank you for watching or listening to this podcast. You can find out more about my books, the other podcasts, and of course, the courses that I run on my website, which is www.florencemadden.co.uk. And I hope you'll join me again next week when the title of the podcast is Who's Driving My Ship? Bye for now.